In other words, when the circumstances are such which would require reconsideration and whether recharacterization is possible, then recharacterization can be done. Now we'll talk about what OECD says. OECD talks about possibilities of recharacterization in two circumstances. When it says that it talks about that substance is not according to the form, then recharacterization is possible. The second possibility it talks about is that when the transaction is such that it is not sort of at arm's length, what independent enterprise would not enter into. So in that circumstance, recharacterization is not possible. Now, if we examine these particular facts, if it is pending for 2 years, I mean, there could be situation because of which shares could not have been issued. But if that situation requires recharacterization or not, that would depend on the facts of the case. So, whenever recharacterization is to be done, you need to take into consideration facts of the case. Coming to the Indian law, because OECD law you cannot apply in a straitjacket manner in Indian situation. Indian law in many number of court decisions have said that nomenclature given to the transaction is not determinative of the real character of the transaction. So when the nomenclature, let us say, is of share subscription and is not the correct, actually in substance the correct transaction, then even because of the case laws, judicial precedent, recharacterization is possible. So if the officer comes to conclusion after examining the agreement or attendant facts, then he can characterize it as a loan, and then naturally notional interest also will follow.
If the apparent is not there.
If it is so.
No, like if the facts are like with the RBI I have reported as a share application money. In the books of AE it is lying as an share capital. Share application money received from the AE. So these are the facts, and it is not being issued for 2 years because of certain reasons. Then how you will decide?
And the owner, see, ultimately justification. See, at the end of the day, your transfer pricing analysis, not all is quantitative. It has to be qualitative as well. So what are the reasons? There could be business reasons for doing that, and assuming it's a genuine transaction and genuine reasons why this is not being converted or not, shares are not being issued, I would feel that it would be. But the owners, you cannot just say that this is what we have done and we continue to do it. So there will be an obligation for you to maintain the reasons and the documentation to say that why this is not happening, if at all required.
In the Delhi High Court judgment regarding this marketing intangibles, AMP expenditure, I think the High Court has said that it is an international transaction.
Right.
So is that not recharacterization? I don't know. Someone has to edit that. What is your view?
No, so that's the point that we were coming to, is that where AMP expenditure is made is purely a third party expenditure, assuming that there is no related party, it should not be an international transaction, right? That's the thing that we said. But at the end of the day, it is very difficult because international transaction also covers arrangement. So it is very difficult to prove that the Indian company is making those expenses not in conjunction or an arrangement with the overseas entity. It is very difficult to prove that. So how can the tax authorities say that you have done something more than what is required as compared to the comparable? Hence, it is assumed that there is an understanding between you and your parent that you are supposed to make that expenditure. So that there is a thought process to that, and that arrangement can never be proven because it's a question about there nothing being there in writing on that issue. But that is what I think the link that they are trying to create.
And how do we decide how much to be reported as an international transaction? Because bright line test is rejected now. So how much?
No. So you are not supposed to. I don't think that's a law unless it comes out in the law that AMP expenditure is this thing. And if the assessee believes that there is no arrangement, you will continue to not show it as an international transaction. Right?
Yeah. So I'll add to this. Like in some of the cases, assessees are receiving some subsidy from the foreign parents. In that case, that is the transaction, and then you will report it. Now, in some of the cases where you have already identified that there was an international transaction, you will have to report it now. But how do you report? That becomes a very problematic thing because there is no bright line test now.
So what is your view?
No, it's difficult.
No, so if you ask me independent of it, I would say that you should not report it because you see at the end of the day, tell me that if independently also, if the Indian company was not related and it is taking something on license, obviously it's going to use it. It's not going to keep it in the cupboard. It's going to use it for making it known in the market, create the visibility, and ultimately it is going. At the end of the day, the profitability is going to be the key. That is what because a third party will look at the profitability. So I would say that you should not, unless there is, so let the court say it, and even if the Supreme Court says it, I would say that it has to come in the law to really say that this is an international transaction specifically covered. I don't know how that is possible.
There are two aspects, legal and what you say,
From the legal.
economic, I would say. Economically, one cannot deny that AMP expenditure would help the AE. Now the issue is, or the dispute could be the quantum, and that's the crux of it. Now High Court has said right line is not there to determine quantum. I am not very sure what could be there. I am not for minute saying that right line is the ideal method, but after having created the gap, how to fill the gap is equally difficult.
Friends, so then we'll take a 5-minute break. Huh? Just a 5-minute break. Just a 5-minute bio break. Thank you.
क्या बोलता है कि इशू अगर नॉन रिफंडिंग हाँ हाँ मैं आप घूम के आओ ना हम लोग इंडियन कंपनी में से वो इंडियन कंपनी के लिए बनाया यहाँ पे आप इश्यू बोल रहे हो कि फॉरेन कंपनी को शेयर इश्यू करने का ये बोलता है कि अगर इंडियन कंपनी ने कुछ शेयर इश्यू किए वो यहाँ